Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Samuel here with Yesports, here today to interview Aikini, former professional Blade and Soul player for Team Guardian out of North America. How are you doing, Aikini?
Hello. I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. Came back from the gym,
Nice. Okay.
then this
So,
resting.
uh, tell me, in the time that you were playing Blade and Soul, uh, there's not really many tournaments sticking around anymore, but how do you feel about the game?
Yeah, I'd say back in the days when the tournaments were happening, the game was in a good state. It was very healthy. They had a few key things that made it stand out from a lot of other MMOs that I'd say attracted a bunch of people to want to do something esports related with it.
Right. And like what sort of special things do you think BNS had that the other games didn't?
I'd say the class variety was pretty good. Like the way that classes operated, even though they had certain kinds of weapons, the visuals of the classes were very appealing. Um, let's see. I think yeah, I would say that's my biggest thing as far as like why I joined the game.
Right, right.
Just the
So
visuals.
I'm curious to ask you, so, you know, I played Blade and Soul, competitively along with you, and one thing I found about the genre, because this was my first, step into fighting games, was that unlike other games like, League or StarCraft, there's more, it's like so fast paced and everything happens so quickly that, sometimes you don't have time to think. You just have to act, which, sort of creates this element of not only unpredictability, but sort of, I almost want to say chance. Like if you use this skill just as your opponent uses that skill, then it sort of, it can come down to luck in some cases. What's your take on that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say you see this in every game, honestly. But I think Blade and Soul, yeah, I'd say a lot of that, or not a lot of it, but at least a good amount of it would come down to luck. And then sometimes, I would say at the beginning at least, because people were playing while not knowing what the other classes were all about. So a
Right.
lot of it would come down to, throwing center skills and then hoping that it landed. I mean, I don't know that I also did the same thing a couple times because it's like, hey, if you're gonna die, you might as well, right?
Right. That's true. That's true. So, that being the case, what was your sort of improvement method approach to the game?
Oh, I would say for me, because I really enjoyed playing the game at the time, I wanted to play every class. So, for example, I started with assassin. I learned how to play it in PvP, and I knew what the skills, what everything did. So I was like, okay, now I know what this class does. Let's move on to the next. So then I went to Blade Master, learned that class. Around that time, I believe the main class that ended up sticking to, which was Warlock. I really liked the way the class looked, so I was like, okay, that's the next class. And then I kept it going, just try it out every class, learn the skills, learn the cooldowns, learn what they do, move on to the next one. And that's how I got to where I got.
So, in other words, you took a comprehensive approach. That's really interesting because in a lot of games, uh, I come from a StarCraft background, so like when you practice a race, it's very rare to see another person like practicing the other races to figure out how to beat them. So it's very interesting you took that approach. So when you got to a really high level, um, where you played the class better than all the others, how would you say like you figured out how to beat the other top players? Because you really were one of the very top players. What did you do that gave you that edge over the others?
Well, the same thing basically. I just learned what the class does, but also on top of that, honestly, um, I would say that there's a lot of niche things that certain players did that kind of led me to ended up like beating them at times. Like certain people would, let's say, use their CC breaker and then immediately engage. Other people wouldn't do that. And so when I saw what kind of player I was dealing with, I'd say, okay, this is the guy that likes to play aggressive. I know where I can punish him if he does go aggressive. And that's usually how I ended up winning a lot of the matches.
Okay, so it was a matter of knowing your enemy.
Correct.
So, for those of you who don't know, I should mention that Aikini went to the World Championships twice in Korea. And the third year, no, you went 3 times, didn't you?
No, twice,
Twice.
and then once to Europe for
Okay.
another type of tournament.
That was where we played, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, okay, okay. And then there was that's right, that's right. There was only one team that went to Korea that year.
Yeah, yeah.
So in regards to okay, so here's an interesting point. So the last interview I had was with Esports Canada, and what they do, just to give you a bit of information, is that they go to Canadian, K to 12 schools and they approach teachers and educate them about esports. And one of the things that they mentioned to the teachers is that esports helps develop skills just like any other actual sport would. So like interpersonal skills, teamwork skills, getting along skills, all the above. So, Blade and Soul being a team game, how do you feel that, from a pro player's perspective, you develop these skills?
Let's see. I could say that, for example, one of my teammates, the Bears, his name is Nathan. We played during a bunch of tournaments, so I got to learn like how he likes to play and what type of things he's good at and what type of things he's not good at. So I would say that's something that applies to IRL. You kind of like know what people's strengths are and their weaknesses, and you learn to cooperate with them and overcome their weaknesses with your help. So that's one thing of as far as communic or teamwork and communication. The other thing would be, I guess, the way that they look at certain things or like their aspect of it. Because, for example, obviously feedback is very important. So I would tell them, hey, I think you're not doing this good enough. And here's how I would approach the situation. And maybe hopefully get them to understand like this could be better for both of us in such a way, right? So I think that's another thing. It's like feedback, the way that you tell someone a certain type of info, it might help them later on in the future as well.
That's a great point. Especially in the world of gaming, sometimes people are heated after losses, and so
Oh
they
yeah.
they take feedback very poorly. So like, did you ever have that experience within Team Guardian, where it was like sometimes like the tension was a little thick and you had to sort of
Honestly, no. I mean, in general, my approach to video games is like I'll get heated, but sometimes but it's very, very rare that I'll get heated because when I enjoy the game, as much as something might like annoy me, I still end up coming like, okay, this is nice. Like I want to learn like how to prevent this from happening, and it kind of makes me like want to dive deeper into the game. So for me personally, I would say nah. Like
okay. Your team's got it lucky to have you. I'd say that's a good approach of looking at it. So in regards to uh, let's talk about company side of things. Like in regards to how the competitions were run and such, um, there aren't really many competitions anymore. So what would you say the company's mistake was because like you said at the start, it was a very vibrant scene. It drew a lot of people. Like, what do you think happened?
I think what happened was so first I would say it was the division of the Korean branch and the North American branch. Because, for example, they would pay attention to the patches as far as the Korean side of things, not so much the North American side of things. And that was something that we as players wanted to address, is that we wanted our feedback to also be incorporated in future patches. So we tried to get the higher ups from the North American branch to send that feedback over to the Korean branch and hopefully see improvements in the game in later patches. However, I don't think that they quite got through to them. I'm not really sure how that all played out, but I just know that the patches, the quality of the patches kind of kept accelerating the game in a way that it wasn't healthy and people didn't want that to happen. We wanted the game to remain in the slow pace that it had because it was still, even though slow paced, it was chaotic. There was a lot of teamwork happening. Classes weren't too oppressive. And so I think that was one of the major downfalls as to what happened. And that one, yeah, that's that I'd say that's the biggest one for me, honestly.
I see. I'll just mention to our listeners that speaking of classes being oppressive, there was one patch where they released a new class called Warden, which was absolutely broken, and
Correct, correct.
and me and Aikini
Like
jumped on that
Warden was
bandwagon.
just,
Yeah, but
I
we
mean,
jumped
well,
on that
yeah.
bandwagon so fast. We were both playing Warden and just slapping people.
It's just what tends to happen, especially in competitive play. It's like you have to play the strongest things because you're competing for money. And when there's money on the line, you really want your chances to be as high as they can be. So
Yeah,
you really
yeah.
like when the classes need released and they're busted, you have to learn them. There's no other way about it.
I'll say that you were much better at that than me. I remember you were like super high ranked with like 4 or 5 classes, and I still only really knew how to play like I mean like two, I guess, after Warden came out. But I stuck with Blade Dancer, and at the time that I was really practicing it, it was pretty low tier because that's when the party Maelstrom already got nerfed and everything like that. So
Yeah.
I was like really stubborn and just stuck with it. But
I
uh,
honestly accredit a bunch of that to the fact that I had the previous experience from like learning all the other classes. I think that was one of the biggest things that helps anything. Like if you know the fundamentals of anything that you do, like it doesn't matter what new things come in, you can always adjust and figure out what works and what doesn't. So that was one of the biggest things that I had as far as like a competitive edge on some of the other players is that they didn't touch as many classes as I did. They didn't want to do the learning part, but I did because I really enjoyed the game and all the aspects of every other class enough to want to learn them all.
right, it's a totally good point. So when you were traveling to Korea, one thing that the really high level gamers have to negotiate with is jet lag. So,
Ooh,
how did you
yeah.
deal with that?
For me, the jet lag was non-existent.
What? How?
I basically, the gamer schedule, I'm sure some of us would know, isn't exactly the most healthy per se, but when you're going to sleep at like 4 or 5 in the morning and you're waking up and you're like going to another country who's basically that's like daytime, you're kind of just like in your zone.
That's super funny.
So I was just like, hey, this isn't anything new to me. I'm already going to sleep at this time or waking up at this time. So it's like, I really just, it feels the same to me.
Totally unfazed. So, within the first 1 or 2 years of playing, you were already in Korea, competing at Worlds with the best. So, what would you say, like, did that have an impact on your nerves? Like, were you really nervous in the booth playing? And was it like sort of surreal playing against these people who, like, don't even speak your language?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my God. It was bad. The first few days, especially not even just during the tournament, but also during the practice time, I was just so scared because I was like, oh my God, all of these people legitimately play the game like just their hearts out. Everybody, including even like the lowest ranks. For example, even like League of Legends, like the Korean bronzes are like diamond level players in North America. Like these guys are just good. And somehow they're stuck down there, but even then they're just good. So during tournaments, I think that amped up to like 10 times the amount. I was so scared. My hands were shaking constantly. I think one of the things that helped was when you're finally in the booth and you have like the headphones and the noise canceling, you kind of just like take a deep breath and you just focus. And I think honestly, looking back, that was something that I couldn't get when I came back home. It's just that level of excitement for the game, knowing that you're about to fight someone who is just really, really good. I was just mind blown. But after a while, I think I did end up overcoming it.
Right. And how would you say the level was when you were playing against, the top Korean players versus the practice you were getting at on North America?
I would say the practice in Korea was way, way better than North America. Just the practice alone. Um, During matches, same thing. I think I ended up playing a lot more cautiously than I would in regular games because I was again like there's money on the line. I really don't want to let my team down. So I was like, you know what? Where I feel I could maybe pressure, I didn't do it. I just kind of played safe. But after a while, like people were just like, oh my god, that guy's popping off, and you also just feel confident when you're beating some of the top players. You're just like, all right, I got this. I'm a top player too. I can do this. So it was just good after a while.
It's interesting you say that you play more cautiously because when I was practicing in North America, I was playing from Victoria to the Texas, server location, and the ping's just terrible. And for our listeners, Blade and Soul is the most ping dependent game I've ever played. It's like psychopathic. Like,
Absolutely.
and when I was in Europe and playing on the Amazon servers, and everything was so responsive, I was actually way more brave because I trusted my game to react the way that it was
Correct.
meant to. So
That
it's
too,
it's,
yeah.
it's interesting you had that perspective. So one thing I did notice is that the first year that Worlds happened with the North American, Europe, and Russian regions combined, is that you know when the North American players got to Korea and started their practice on the ranked ladder, they were able to climb super high. Like I was watching Yasuni play, and he was getting like top five on the server practicing. And it's interesting because if you look at other titles, if you look at StarCraft, if you look at League of Legends, if you look at Dota, that'll never happen. Like you're not gonna get a year or two of practice, go to the Korean server and get top five. Like it's
Oh yeah.
unheard of. So how do you feel like how did you guys close the gap so fast?
I would say I know for the Yasuni side, since he's Korean, he had the outside help of some of the other Korean players. Like he was able to, since he's able to communicate with them. And I would say that, they also, because we were both friendly teams, like we knew each other. We've been competing against each other. And so yeah, we had that friendly vibe going. And I would say that he helped us as well because whatever information he got from them, he would tell us as well. And we could improve that way. So I would say that's one way where we bridged the gap between the servers. And for me, I mean, the other way was just spamming like an unhealthy amount of games, like as much as I could, because I was like, yeah, I really want to be good for my team. So I will fight everybody in the server. And I was just like, all right, let's just go in and do what we can.
It's good to hear you guys had that kind of collegiality. I'm sure that if I was in that situation, I'd be like, nah, screw those guys. I'm just gonna keep all the tricks for myself. Pull them out.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame them, honestly.
Yeah. So when you went to, you mentioned that when you went to Worlds, your nerves were shot, but like, did it get better the more you do it? Like the second time you went to Worlds, was it a little bit easier or was it like different?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I would say yeah. The second time I was way more comfortable in just competing in stage. That was one of the fears, and just overall how good I feel about my own skill in general. Like I was like, okay, I fought against these guys before. I know what they're about, and I know that I'm also as good as they are. So I'm not scared as much.
That makes sense. So, when you were in Korea, like, I mean, it was your first time there, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah, correct.
Was it like Korea's sort of its own little industry because they're really set up for esports because esports was originally sort of accredited to StarCraft 1 where it sort of exploded in Korea and people were like Blizzard was like what the heck, people are playing our game like super competitively at high level, so they have this whole industry set up for the games. What would like did you feel that when you went to Korea? Were you like, holy crap, I'm in a completely different environment?
Oh yeah, I think Korea, as at least as a culture, like a lot of those guys are just very competitive. Like they really just when they play a game, they play that game to be the best. Like they really do.
S-
So
So it's like a separate sort of culture mindset approach to
correct.
activities.
Like they're just really, really on it. They want to be good
Would you
because
say that like I mean, I guess part of the motivation is all the money that's involved there. I mean, there's a lot more money. I'd definitely be more motivated if there's more
absolutely.
green behind it. So when you were preparing from tournament to tournament, because you were playing so many of the same opponents over and over again, and you guys really knew each other's gameplay. How do you prepare for that? Because this happens in every game where you eventually start meeting the same opponents over and over again, and you like try to play games or tricks with each other.
Hmm. Um, Honestly, I'd say there's a little bit of a difference between like just playing off. By offline, I mean just like at the internet cafe or on the regular servers compared to a more tournament setting. Um, a lot of those guys would play one way, and then at their tournament, they're actually turning it around a little bit. But hmm, it's a little bit. It's honestly don't know how to put it in words. The way they play after the tournament setting is a lot more meticulous than how they play it in offline servers. So it was
Metic
just something like meticulous in
Meticulous.
the way that
Sorry, let's keep going.
um
Keep going.
yeah, no, meticulous in the way that like sometimes they really do change it up. Like if they play super aggressively when when it's only rating in line and not money, and then when there's money involved, they're like, okay, back it up real quick. Let's play really, really specific to what we need to do as a team. Like the coordination level was just way different than how they would play a regular match when it non-tournament setting.
So you would say that overall people played better on stage than they did.
Yeah, I mean, especially because the fact that we're all playing on the same thing, which is I would say a little bit better during the tournament setting. The PC specs are also better. There's no inequality there, so people are just overall playing better in general.
Yeah, I will say tournament servers are much better than the regular servers.
Yeah, I mean, you play too, so like at least when I'm playing home, I used to play on like a 60 hertz monitor. When I played on the tournaments, they had the 144,
Oh my
and
gosh.
that was just an eye opener for me. Like I was like, okay, when I get home, I need to get a 144 hertz monitor because I could see everything so much better and clear. Like I was just like, I need this. I can't go
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. This applies for all games for any of our listeners. If you're like the higher hertz your monitor, the like it is the single easiest, most impactful upgrade you can make to your setup
Absolutely.
just to get a higher hertz monitor. It's mind blowing. You like I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah, yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, but you like even though things are starting at the same time, the information is flowing into your brain so much more fluidly that you have like it somehow gives you more reaction time to issues. So I could see it totally helping for things like FPS if somebody's peeking around a corner or something like that. Like just having a higher hertz monitor is going to do you wonders.
Yeah.
So one thing you had to do is, as a pro player, is deal with some publicity. So when you were getting like interviews from players and from uh, even just the company or staff or communicating with staff, like what sort of lessons did that teach you?
Hmm. Let's see. I would say maybe I mean I'm trying to put it nicely, but I really had like a bit of an ego back there, which I still kind of do. So whenever we had interviews and things like that, I would try to tell my team captain, I would say, hey, let me handle the interview because I want to talk smack. I think that's the thing that kind of like hypes up the game, especially even for the viewers. I was like, you need to have your smack talk. You need to have the team rivalry. You need to get in there and have get everybody to hype up, is including the players for the tournament because they really, really, really want to beat each other up. So as far as that's what I did. At least I was just like, listen, let me handle the interviews. I got the smack talk coming in. You already know we about to hype it up.
Okay. And you were mentioning earlier that you were talking with North American staff to try and get your feedback and input to Korea. But I know that it wasn't just balance you guys were working on. It was like all sorts of issues from small things, like from like
Oh,
cheaters
correct.
on the
Yes, yes.
server and other things like that. So would you say that had an impact on your sense of professionalism?
Uh, I would say, yeah, for sure. I mean, when you're competing in a tournament, especially as a player, you're expected to at least perform the how do you say it? The honesty of like not trying to rig a tournament or anything like that. So it's really not in your best interest to try and cheat the system, if that makes sense. Like you don't want to be doing anything foul. And I think some players actually ended up, not the people who competed at least, because as a community, we were like, okay, these players that are attending this tournament have been known to try to cause trouble. So we tried to tell the organizers like, hey, watch these people because, we want the tournament to be as fair as possible for everybody.
Right. So like cheating and win trading and like throwing and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that people don't think about this side so much, but it does happen. I mean, even in the when Bobby Fischer was trying to become the world chess champion, the Russians were intentionally trading matches against each other to rank highly in order so he couldn't pass in the bracket. So there's a it's a lot of foul play sometimes that goes on behind the scenes that you don't just see. And basically what I can be saying here is that it's your civic gamer duty to call it
Correct.
out.
Honestly, I would say, I don't know if you saw, they're hosting a Call of Duty tournament, like a Warzone tournament. Are you familiar with the game? It's like,
Ish.
Battle Royale, but Call of Duty style type of thing, right?
Okay, okay.
So there's like a big prize pool going on, and somebody was getting called out because they saw the bracket, and the bracket displays the stats of each player. And so when you're looking at a player and you're like, okay, I know that guy's really good, but then you look at his score and it's like 9 kills, 31 deaths. You're like, hold on,
Oh,
that seems kind of off. And then you see the other guy who is also good, and then you see that guy has like 90 kills, 7 deaths in a tournament setting. Nonetheless, you're like, is there a bit of trading back and forth? And I think that's what, like, somebody ended up catching onto that and taking it to Twitter and saying like, hey, that guy's doing a little bit of something, trying to get into like the big tournament to try and win a lot of money by win trading essentially.
right, right. So, what I found really interesting, in Blade and Soul, that there were all sorts of personalities, and like you and I both remember Jojen. He wasn't a competitive player, like he didn't actively participate in tournaments, but he easily could have if he wanted to. He was
Oh yeah.
insanely good, and he was the guy that nobody hated, right? Like, I mean, people hated him because he was amazing, but like nobody
Yeah.
disliked him as a person, and he was like a super quiet, like quiet person. Like he didn't cause any trouble. He never sort of like smack talk anybody or caused
Yeah.
like. Let me put it this way: he wasn't a troublemaker, right? He was like a super mellow, nice dude, and I noticed that most of the pro players who I think that sort of speaks to the actions that we all took. For example, you and I were both very vocal players, but you and I were both people who were constantly throwing ourselves into tournaments, whereas like players like Jojen, while they were incredibly talented, they weren't. And
Mhm.
it's like you said, when there's money involved, you gotta
Yeah.
you gotta speak up because as I've heard before, your money is no joke. So,
Yeah.
like in regards to these different kind of personalities, what would you say that taught you in terms of interpersonal skills when playing and getting tips from people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I would say at the beginning, especially when you're talking about Georgian, for example, because I would say that I put myself there as well, in the sense that when tournaments were happening, I was definitely nervous and scared, and I didn't really want to do the tournaments, but my teammate ended up being the one to convince me. So maybe, if somebody had been a little bit more vocal to Georgian, he would have ended up joining and actually being a really good player in the tournaments as well. So that's one thing that I think would have helped, is getting somebody that is good, and then like trying to work them and make them comfortable to the idea of participating in a tournament because you think that they could do really well. So that's one. And I would say maybe as far as like a team perspective, hmm, how do I put this? When you end up performing in a stage and you realize that like you have something to give, like you know that you have the skill, but on a tournament setting it's a little bit different. But when you perform, you feel an immense amount of confidence. Honestly, it could also be a huge letdown depending, but for the most part, it's like it's a really good experience to have, and I would say it should be something that you would want to get comfortable because it might help you IRL as well. Like you might be a quiet person IRL, think that you might not have something to give, but then you compete and you realize you do have potential to become successful and give something. So that would help you IRL as well. You might realize that you have potential to kind of change the way that you work.
So why on earth would you think that you might not be able, like, why, like, they convinced you to play and you thought that maybe you didn't have it in you? Like, what made you think that? Because you were topping all the ladders anyways.
Just for me, just the tournament settings, it was something that I was really, really scared of. I was like, oh God, these guys are really good. I don't really want to like play against them like that, especially for money. And the other part would be, I'd
It's
say
like,
taking the step of traveling. I think traveling alone can be really scary for some people. I mean, for me, absolutely it was. I had to do a lot of convincing towards my mother to let
oh,
me actually attend. I had to like put her on the phone with my teammate, and he convinced her. He's like, "Don't worry, I'll take care of him. We'll look out for each other," type of thing.
oh
So that was
wow.
the biggest thing. I was just
Oh.
like, "Oh my God."
So you would say to anybody who's, like performing well, but not really sure and feeling the pressure and not really sure if they would take the next step, you would encourage them to give it a shot.
Yeah, honestly, just give it a shot. I mean, obviously, be smart about your planning, where you're going to be at, the kind of, like, I don't know, like hotel booking, stuff like that. You're eating as well, how much money you have going on, that type of thing. Like you should definitely look into that prior to doing that. But if you are able to, I would say take the opportunity to do it. You never know what's going to happen, really.
Right. So what would you say to players who are, trying to break out into the scene and they're improving, but they want to get to that next level to compete, to do what you've done.
I think honestly, the first step is like do a bunch of matches. Just put your name up there on the ladder. Get people to like see what you're about. I'd say, like, for example, in League of Legends, there's a lot of challenger players, right? But not all of them really make it because a lot of them might not have the fundamentals that they want in a tournament setting. So as long as you like really care about the game and you do every info and you look like a solid fundamental player, you might even catch someone else's view and they might want to try to invite you to a team. Or even if they don't, even if that doesn't happen, I would say you also have like social media venues where you can try to hit up some of the other players, get something going that way, get it, and then that way you might be able to join another team and put yourself out there for people to want to get you into the competitive scene.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. We're going to wrap it up here, Aikini. Thanks again for the interview. It was awesome catching up with you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the invite, honestly.
Of course. Catch you later.